Hey, Chayve, was machst du? What's happening? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Peches, Daf Ayruvin. No. Daf 88 of Masechta Ayruvin. You remember what Daf Peches was of Masechta Shabbos? Wasn't that where we talked about like Mamar or Sinai and all that stuff? Akoponim. So we're talking about pouring water through a balcony, usurping property. I think that's the right word. And cesspools. Chayve, what could be bad? All right, Daf Peches. We're going to start on Daf Pei Zayin Amud Beis, about 6 lines from the bottom, 7 lines, maybe 8. Ich weiß nicht. Epis, whatever. So there were 3 things that Reb Chananya ben Akavya permitted for the people living in Tiberia. Number 1, mimalin maim migzuztra b'Shabbos, that we can fill up water from a gezuztra, from a balcony on Shabbos. V'tomnin be'otze. Number 2, and we're going to explain what these are. Number 2 is that you're allowed to insulate fruits with like bean, like when, I don't know, when you're harvesting beans, like what's the word? The stuff that kind of falls off of it. The bean, not like refuse, but the bean, I can't remember the word, but like, if you had like branches and stuff like that. Fine. Mistabkim ba'alontis, and you can also dry yourself with a towel. Chevre, let's see what these things are. So, so Reb Chananya ben Akavya's halacha, what he permitted to Anshe Tiberia about filling up water from a balcony on Shabbos, is that what we described yesterday, which was that if the balcony is 4 amis by 4 amis, you could make a hole 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim and view it as though the walls are folded over, as well as good achis, as well as they go down to the water, right? And that was davka by Tiberia because it was a kula, a leniency by Tiberia because it's surrounded with a lip and houses and things. V'tomnim be'otze maihi. What does it mean that you can insulate with these bean like branches? So the Tanya, as we learned in the Brayse, hishkim lavi psoles. So if a person woke up early in order to get these bean branches to be able to insulate fruits with them. So im bishvil sheyesh olav tal areu b'chiyutan. So if he's davko, waking up early in order to get these bean branches so that he could insulate fruits, because early in the morning there will be dew on these branches and it will insulate the fruits, and the davka want to be insulating fruits with these bean branches that have dew. Well, then it will be b'chiyutan. It will be like kiyutan is the pasuk when it comes to tumas, in the context of tumas shrotzim, right, where we learn out that in order for something to be mukhshir lekabel tumah, that we've learned about in the past, that in order for something to be able to receive tumah, it needs to come in contact first with water. So if he's specifically interested in this dew that is on the bean branches, and that's why he's waking up early so he can chop them when there's still dew on it, so then the dew will be machshir the fruits lekabel tumah. However, if he's waking up early so that he can manage to chop arayin and get these branches while they still have dew, but the dew is really just a technicality, he's really just wants to get these branches and insulate the fruits before, so that he could do it all before he gets to work, right? So he'll be able to get this all done before he needs to get to work. Well, then einu b'chiyutan, then it will not be machshir the fruits of the kabel tumah, because he's not really interested in this dew. It's just that there happens to be dew on it when he's going early in the morning before work. So v'stam anshe Tiberia k'misha levatam imlachto dami, and Reb Chananya ben Akavya paskin la'aloche that the people in Tiberia, they, as Rashi says, baalei melacha hayu, they're workers. And therefore, in Tiberia, just the people who live there have a default status of, if they wake up early to get these bean branches to insulate fruits with, that it will, the dew will just be a technicality. They're not particularly interested in the dew. They're waking up early so that they could still get to work on time, and therefore the fruits that they are insulating with these branches that have dew on them will not be included in the will not be moksha lekabel tumah, will not be able to receive impurities. And what is the leniency that Reb Chananya ben Akavia had for the people of Tiberia regarding towels, drying with towels. The Tanya, as we learn in a Brayso, Mistapik Adam Balontis, that on Shabbos a person can dry himself with a towel, Umanicha b'chalon, and then he leaves it in the window of the bathhouse, V'lo yimsrena le'olayrin, but do not give it to the bathhouse attendant, because he may then end up wringing it out, squeezing it out, and we don't want him to do that. Reb Shimon says you don't have to leave the towel in the window, you can actually take it home with you, assuming that you can carry it home. And we're not concerned that you are going to wring out your towel. And he says that the people in Tiberia can do that, they can take their towels home with them, and then you don't have to be concerned about wringing it out. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, says Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, lo shanu ela lemalos, that when they say that, when the Mishnah says that, what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah had said, that we learned yesterday, that if you have a balcony, and it is above water, so if you want to be able to draw water from the water from the water below the balcony, you have to make walls around it. So Rabbi Bar Huna says, Lo shanu el lemalos. This is only talking about filling up water, right? So if you want to fill up water and bring it into your balcony on Shabbos, so before Shabbos you have to put up walls around the balcony, and you also need to make a hole in the balcony so you can drop the bucket through. And that way you could draw water to your balcony. But you would be unable to, you would not be allowed to take like sewage water, I guess water that's dirty, maybe wash the dishes with it, whatever it is, you wouldn't be able to take that and then pour it down through the hole into the water below. Because what will happen is, the water is moving. So Mela, you're gonna pour the water through the hole. It's gonna hit the water, the moving water below, and then go outside of the area of your balcony, and that would not be allowed. So it would basically be going outside of your Rishus HaYachid, because of course, the area below your balcony is considered Rishus HaYachid, because we say good achis, that the walls of your balcony go down until the water, and therefore you're drawing water from your Rishus HaYachid. But Memele, once you pour the water through the hole in the balcony, it's going to hit the water and then keep on moving. And then it's going to leave your Rishus HaYachid into, I guess, the rest of the water, which is a carmelis. And therefore it's a problem to pour it through the hole. Maskefler Rav Shezvi asks, what's the difference between this and a cesspool? We're going to learn a little bit later about cesspools. And if you have a cesspool that's already filled up, you're nonetheless allowed to pour more sewage into the cesspool, even though it's certainly going to overflow, but that isn't necessarily your intention. You're not intending for it to overflow. You would be very happy for it to just get absorbed in the ground. And yet we say that you're allowed to pour this water in, even though it will overflow and end up going into Rishus HaRabim. So here also, let him pour the water through the hole, and he's pouring it in his Rishus HaYachid, right, because it's surrounded by walls, and even though, sure, it's going to end up going outside of his Rishus HaYachid, but why do we care? After all, in the case of the cesspool, you could pour the water in, even if it's overflowing, and Memela, it's going to end up overflowing into Rishus HaRabim, and that was okay. So, Hani Taime Vani Lo Taime, the nafkamina is, the difference is that when it comes to the cesspools can actually dry up. Meaning, right, the whole point of the cesspool is that you're going to pour the water into there and it can get absorbed into the ground from there. And therefore, really when you're pouring the sewage into the cesspool, your intention is for it to get absorbed into the ground. And if it doesn't, so then it's not your intention. But over here, there isn't really a chance of it getting absorbed in the ground. You're just pouring it into a body of water. So that is why it would not be allowed. Ikadamer, that those who say actually the opposite. Amar Rabbi bar Rav Huna lo tema lemalos udeshari lishboch aser. Rabbi bar Huna, so there's a different version in which Rabbi bar Huna says, don't say that it's only permitted to fill up water, but to pour water would be forbidden. No, don't say that. El lishboch nami shari. It's also permitted to pour water through the hole into the body of water below. Amar Rav Shezvi pshita hanu uka. So to which Rav Shezvi says, of course, this is the same thing as that cesspool that's filled up that you're nonetheless allowed to pour more water into. But ma'udete mahani taimi vani lo taimi kamash malan. But I may have thought to say, yeah, but maybe you can't say the same thing, because by a cesspool, you can assume, your intention is for it to get absorbed in the ground, which is not the case over here. Kamash malan, that even so, you would still be allowed to pour the sewage through the hole into the water. So just two different versions of Rabbi bar Rav Huna. One version says that you'd be unable to pour the sewage through the hole into the water below. The other one says that you would be. The other version is that you would be allowed. And we said similarly in the Mishnah we had this was the source of that case we've been talking about a few times over the past few days, which is when you have the two balconies, one above the other, but kind of off to the side, right? Not directly one above the other, but along the same building. So Amar Avuna, Amar Rav, Loshanu Ela Besmucha. We saw this the other day on Daf Pehei Amar Aleph, that when we say, so what's the case? The case is that you have two balconies. Let's say one balcony is on the second floor of the building, the other balcony is on the third floor of the building. They're both over a body of water. And, one's in like apartment A, one's apartment B. They're not directly above each other, like they're off to the side of shtickle. So we said, right, in the upper balcony, they had made a wall around the balcony and also a hole in the floor, but the lower balcony did not. And it's the lower balcony that's going to be taking a bucket tied to a rope and chucking it up to the upper balcony, and hole in one goes through the hole of the floor to the body of water below. And we say that both balconies would be unable to draw water unless they make an Eruv. So Amar Avuna Amar Rav Loshana Ela Besmucha, says Avuna in the name of Rav that when both balconies would be unable to draw water unless they make an Eruv, that is when they are close to each other. But if they are far away from each other, if they are more than 4, was it Tfachim or Amos? What does Rashi say? 4 Tfachim. But if it's more than 4 Tfachim away from each other, so then Elyon Muteris, then the upper balcony would be allowed to use their wall and their hole that they made, even if they didn't make an Eruv with the lower chatzah. They could still draw water from below, if they're more than 4 tfachim away along the building. V'Rav l'taimin, Rav is according to his reasoning, the Amar Rav in Adam Osa Chaver Derech Avir, as we learned the other day. Rav's opinion is that a person does not make asur upon his friend by way of the air, and therefore the fat. What we want to say, and we wanted to say this on Daf Pehei. Also, we ultimately said that we're not going to say it, but the idea here is that once they're far away from each other, the fact that one is lower and one is higher, i.e. the distinction between bizriko or bishilshul goes away, and the only issue now is that they're far away from each other. And says Rav's opinion is that a person is not osir on his friend by way of the air, and therefore the fact that they're far away from each other doesn't matter. And therefore, right, the lower balcony will not be osir on the upper balcony, and therefore the upper balcony can draw water from the water below through their hole in the floor, even if they don't make an Eruv. Fine. Amar Rabba, Amar Reb Chia, says Rabba in the name of Reb Chia, Rav Yosef, Amar Reb Oshaya, says Rav Yosef in the name of Reb Oshaya, Yesh gezel b'Shabbos v'churva machzir levadim. So this is a statement that it doesn't make sense, and the Gemara is going to ask, this doesn't make sense, but what it means is, Yesh gezel b'Shabbos, there is gezel on Shabbos, and this is talking about if you have Reuven lives in a house. Now next door to Reuven's house is a dilapidated ruin that is owned by Shimon. Now, I don't know where Shimon lives. Maybe Shimon lives in a different chutzner, but he doesn't use, or maybe he lives next door. It doesn't really matter, but the fact of the matter is that Shimon doesn't use that dilapidated ruin. Reuven does, right? Reuven, he lives in a house. Next door there's a dilapidated ruin that belongs to Shimon. Shimon doesn't use it. Reuven uses it. So what we're saying is Yesh gezel b'Shabbos, or what the Gemara wants to say that this means at this point is that Yesh gezel b'Shabbos, meaning in terms of Hilchos Ayruvin, we can view it as though Reuven has chapped it and now it belongs to him, and he can continue using this dilapidated ruin on Shabbos even without making a churva, since he kind of uses it all the time, without making an Eruv, even though he uses it all the time. Reuven can use the churva on Shabbos without making an Eruv, since he uses it all the time. Fine. But then we're saying the churva machzir levaylim, that this churva, even though Reuven uses it all the time during the week, actually it goes back to Shimon for Shabbos, and therefore for Reuven to be able to use the churva, he would have to make an Eruv with Shimon. So now the Gemara says Hagufa Kasha. This is inherently contradictory. On the one hand, Amar Yesh gezel b'Shabbos. On the one hand, you're saying that there is theft on Shabbos, right? Al Makanya. which means that it belongs to Reuven, right? Meaning at first we said that since Reuven uses the churva all the time during the week, it's as if he chopped it, and it's his for Shabbos, he doesn't need to make an Eruv. But then we said that when it comes that on Friday, right before Shabbos, the churva, the dilapidated ruin, goes back to Shimon's. Is treated as though it's Shimon's, and Reuven would have to make an Eruv with Shimon if he plans to use the churva. So amalo kanya, which means that it doesn't belong to Reuven. So achi kamar. This is how to understand this statement. Yesh din gazel b'Shabbos. There is a din of gezel, i.e., v'heshev v'sagzela. Meaning that when it comes to Shabbos, even though Reuven uses the dilapidated ruin all the time, he would have to return it to Shimon, meaning it goes back to Shimon on Shabbos, and if Reuven wants to use the Eruv, he would need to make if he wants to use the ruin, he would have to make an Eruv with Shimon. Keitzad, how do we see that there is a din of Gezel on Shabbos? The Churva machzir l'bailim, because we see that the dilapidated ruin goes back to its owner, to Shimon, for Shabbos. Amar Rabba, says Rabba, umosvina nashmaitin, and we ask a kasha based on our Mishnah. V'chein stegzus trozo l'mayla mizo, that when you have two balconies, one is above the other, v'chule, right? So we said that you have two balconies, one is above the other, and so now the upper balcony made walls and also a hole in the floor, but the lower balcony didn't. But the lower balcony uses the upper balcony all the time to get their water, and we say that the lower balcony is oser on the upper balcony, i.e., they're considered that they have a connection to it, and if the upper balcony wants to be able to draw water on Shabbos, they would have to make an Eruv together. But if we say that there's a din gazel on Shabbos and the property goes back to its original owners, so then how come the upper balcony is unable to draw water through the hole if we're saying that there's a din gazel and it goes back to them on Shabbos? Meaning, even though all week the lower balcony is using the upper balcony to draw water, but we said, right, yesh din gazel b'Shabbos, that there's a din of gazel on Shabbos, i.e. v'heshev v'sagzela, that everything goes back for Shabbos, and therefore when Shabbos comes, the upper balcony is essentially reclaiming the rights to their balcony, and they should be able to draw their own water without having to worry about the lower balcony being oser on them. So Reb Sheshes answers by saying, yeah, but the difference in this case is that they actually came together to make the walls. Meaning, neither balcony initially had walls, and they decided, you know what, we want to be able to draw water on Shabbos, let us jointly put together some walls on the upper balcony, and that way at least we'll be able to use the upper balcony for water. So because they jointly put it together, or not necessarily specifically for Shabbos, but to be able to draw water in general, I guess, but then since they jointly put an effort in making the walls, so therefore the lower balcony has a connection to the upper balcony, and it doesn't go away on Shabbos because since they took part in played a role in putting up those walls. If so, but if that's the case, then when they make walls on the lower balcony, then it should still be a problem. Meaning, the implication of the Mishnah is that davka, because the upper balcony has walls and the lower balcony does not have walls, that is why they would have to make an Eruv. Nobody can draw water on Shabbos unless they make an Eruv together. But the implication being that if the lower balcony did have walls, i.e. if they both had walls, well then they wouldn't have to make an Eruv together. But if we're saying that it's talking about where the lower balcony contributed to the walls of the upper balcony, and therefore they have like a part in it, and that's why the upper balcony cannot draw water unless they make an Eruv together, well then, meaning so it's implying that the upper balcony would because the lower balcony contributed to the construction of the walls of the upper balcony, therefore they have to make an Eruv together. But what about the fact that our Mishnah implies that if the lower balcony had their own walls, then they wouldn't have to make an Eruv together. But if the lower balcony contributed to the walls of the upper balcony, then they nonetheless should still have to make an Eruv together. So Yachi, right? So Kevan the Asu the Tachtona Gilui Gali Daita the Ana Bahadach Lo Nichali. So the Gemara answers, well, even though we're talking about where the lower balcony contributed to the construction of the walls of the upper balcony. From the fact that the lower balcony made their own walls, it's clearly an indication that they're not interested in being together with the upper balcony, and they would not have to make an Eruv together. And then the upper balcony would be able to draw water without making an Eruv. Okay, Chevin, now we get to the sugya of cesspools. Chatzer pchusa me'arba amis. If you have a chatzer that is less than 4 amis, and the Gemara is going to explain if this means 4 amis by 4 amis, or maybe just a total of 16 square amis, whatever it might be. So chatzer pchusa me'arba amis, if it's less than 4 amis, ein shofchin besocha mayim b'Shabbos elon ken asula uka machzekes sa'asayim. So let's do that again. So if this chatzar is less than 4 amis, well then you may not pour water into this chatzar, like sewage water, wastewater, into this chatzar on Shabbos. Unless you make a cesspool in there, that is capable of holding 2 sa'ah minanekev ulamata, from its like safety valve and below, right? So if you make some kind of a cistern, and then there's some kind of hole in the cistern, so that if the sewage level goes above that hole, it kind of drains out to the Rishus HaRabim. So basically you have to have a cesspool that can hold 2 sa'ah of sewage if the chutzner has an area of less than 4 amis. Fine. Well, 4 amis by 4 amis. Now this cesspool could either be in the chutzner or outside of the chutzner. The only difference is that if you opt to construct the cesspool outside of the chutzner, well then the chutzner is going to have to be covered, and that is because outside of the chutzner is Rishus HaRabim, and you are building this like place to pour your wastewater, the cistern, and if it then gets filled up with debris, and therefore there's less than if it becomes less than 3 tefachim deep, well then it will just be considered part of Rishus HaRabim, right? When it's dug out, it's not part of Rishus HaRabim. But if it gets filled up with stuff and it's less than 3 tefachim deep, well then it'll be considered part of Rishus HaRabim, in which case pouring into there will then be pouring from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, which is a problem. So therefore, if you're going to opt to create this cesspool outside of the chutzner, well then you make sure it's covered so that nothing gets in there and messes with the depth of the cesspool. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Biv Shu Kamur Arba Amis B'Rishus HaRabim. If you have some kind of like a sewage, canal or sorts that goes from the chutzner into Rishus HaRabim, shofchim, and it's covered. So shofchim l'socho mayim b'Shabbos, you would be allowed to pour sewage into this canal or conduit. I think the article said conduit. So you could pour sewage into this conduit on Shabbos, because the assumption is that by the time the sewage would not make it through this 4 amis long, or 4 amis by 4 amis conduit before being absorbed into the ground. So therefore, this 4 amis by 4 amis conduit, which is covered, is not considered Rishus HaRabim, and it will never. The assumption is that it won't actually get to Rishus HaRabim. The sewage won't make it to Rishus HaRabim because it will be absorbed before then. The Chachamim disagree. Chachamim omrim afilu gag o chatzar. Even if you have a roof or a courtyard, mea ama, that is 100 amas long before it would get out to Rishus HaRabim. Lo yishboch al pi abiv, do not pour directly into this canal. Either, I guess, in the chutzner you would pour directly into the canal, or on the roof you would pour directly into some kind of gutter, I guess, that goes down to the canal. But even if there's 100 amas, i.e. plenty of room for the sewage to get absorbed before going out to Rishus HaRabim, nonetheless you'd be unable to pour directly into the canal. Aval, but shofechu legag, but you'd be allowed to pour onto the roof itself, not into the canal directly, but onto the roof. V'amayim yordan lebiv, and then the conduit. So then the water will then be able to go from the roof into the conduit, and from there leave the Rishus HaRabim to the Rishus HaRabim, but do not pour it directly into the conduit. Hachatzer v'achsadra mitztarfen l'arba amis, in terms of measuring 4 amis to determine if you have to build a cesspool or not. So the chatzer can join together with a gatehouse. Shtei diotaos zo keneged zo. If you have 2 apartments, one opposite the other. Miktsasan asu uka or miktsasan lo asu uka. One of them made a cesspool and the other one did not make a cesspool in this lower area. In this lower area that's less than 4 amas by 4 amas. Esha asu uka mutar and eshlo asu uka asurin. So the apartment that made a cesspool, they can pour wastewater into the cesspool, but those who didn't make a cesspool would be unable to pour water into the cesspool below. Okay? My timer. So how come, what's the deal with this 4 amas by 4 amas thing? Like, what's the deal? If it's 4 amas, so then you don't have to build a cesspool, you could just pour the sewage directly into the chotzer. If it's less than 4 amas, well then you do have to build a cesspool. What's the deal? Well, because a person produces 2 sa'ah of wastewater, meaning just, I think when we're talking about wastewater, it's just, water that needs to spill out somewhere. So, I don't know, maybe it's bath water, maybe it's dishwater, whatever it is. Maybe also bathroom. Although bathroom, mistam, I don't know, from like Masechta Brachos, it seems like they would probably, assumption was they were going out to other places, but they have some kind of wastewater, some kind of sewage water that every day they would pour out. And be'arba amis adam rotze lezalfon, pachos midalad shofchan. So if the chotzer is 4 amis, well, then the assumption is that it's a presentation thing. If the chotzer is 4 amas, well then, you'd want your chotzer to look presentable, and therefore you're going to use this water, like a gray water system, that you're going to use this water to pour into the chotzer to kind of keep the dust from rising. But pachos midalid, if the chotzer is less than dalid, less than 4 amas by 4 amas, well then you don't really care that much about it. And when you pour the water into the chotzer, it's not to keep down the dust. It's to, if it's less than 4 amas by 4 amas, it's really, you really just want it to get out to Rosh Hashanah, and that would be a problem. Ida avid uka shari, and therefore, when it's less than 4 amas by 4 amas, if you make a cesspool to contain this wastewater, then it's permitted. Ilo also, if you do not make a cesspool, well then it would be not permitted. Reb Zera Amar, says Reb Zera, Dalad Amas Taime, Pachos Medalad Amas Lo Taime. Reb Zera says that the cutoff of 4 amas is that an area of 4 amas by 4 amas would be able to absorb 2 sa'ah of water. But if it's less than 4 amas by 4 amas, it would be unable to absorb all that water, and memela, it would end up going out to Rosh Hashanah, and we don't want that. My benai, what's the nafkamina between Rabbah, who says that it's about keeping the dust down, and Reb Zera, who says it's about being able to absorb the water? Ike benayu, no, Amar Abaye, says Abaye, Orich v'koyin ike benayu. The nafkamina is, what if this chotzer had an area of 16, right? 4 times 4 is 16. So it had the area of Dalad Amas. It was 16 square amas, but it wasn't necessarily 4 amas by 4 amas. Maybe it was 8 amas by 2 amas. So in that case, Rabbah, who says it's about it being presentable and you want to keep down the dust, well, he would say if it's 8 amas by 2 amas, you're not really so concerned about presenting a chotzer that is in that configuration, and therefore, even then you would have to build a cesspool, right? You wouldn't be able to pour water and assume that it's to keep the dust down. However, according to Reb Zera, who says that it's about being able to absorb the water, well then, regardless if it's 4 amas by 4 amas or if it's 8 amas by 2 amas, there's enough surface area to be able to absorb the water. Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah, Chotzer v'achsadra mitzdarfen the daled amas. We said in our Mishnah that the chotzer and an achsadra, a gatehouse, would be able to, sorry, a base shire is a gatehouse. This is a portico. I don't know what a portico is. I should probably look it up. You know what a portico is? Whatever. But basically, the chotzer and the portico can join together in order to make the daled amis, to determine whether or not you need to build a cesspool. So, Bishlama l'Reb Zera, Nicha. I understand this according to Reb Zera, because the assumption is that when you join together the chotzer with the portico, so then it's going to create a shape that is not 4 amas by 4 amas. Maybe it's 8 amas by 2 amas or something. So El Rabba Kasha. But according to Rabba, how could they be mitzdarif? But then maybe it's not going to be 4 amas by 4 amas. So Tirgma Reb Zera Liba de Rabba B'achsadra Me'aleches Al Pnei Kol HaChatzer Kula. So Reb Zera answers for Rabba and says that that you can say that it's talking about a portico that goes the full length of the chatzar. Meaning, let's say you have a chatzar that is 2 tfachim by 4 tfachim, and then it's right next to a portico that is also 2 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So it creates, or we're talking about amas, 2 amas by 4 amas, and the other one is also 2 amas by 4 amas, so it creates 4 amas by 4 amas. So okay, fine. Tashmaka menir chatzar she'ein ba daled amas al daled amas. If you have a chatzar that doesn't have 4 amas by 4 amas, so whereas in our Mishnah, as I mentioned earlier, our Mishnah doesn't specifically say 4 amas by 4 amas. It says chatzar shepchusa me'arba amas. If it's less than 4 amas, well then ain't shofrim b'soch hamayim unless you make a cesspool. Now, as Reb Zera pointed out, or as we said, the nafkamina between Rabba and Reb Zera is that those 4 amas don't necessarily have to be a square. But we have a brisa which says chatzar she'ein b'daled amas adaled amas ain't shofrim b'soch hamayim b'Shabbos. That if you have a chatzar that is not specifically 4 amas by 4 amas, well then you're unable to pour the sewage water into that chatzar on Shabbos. So that sounds like Rabba, right? That we dafka need it to be square. So Bishlam Rabba Nicha, I get it according to Rabba, right? This brisa is saying exactly what he said, that it needs to be square. El Reb Zera Kasha, according to Reb Zera, how come the brisa is saying it needs to be square? According to Reb Zera, it just needs to have a surface of 16 square amas. So Amalach Reb Zera will respond to you, Hamani Rabbanani, Umasnisin Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. So Reb Zera is going to answer that brisa which says that dafka needs to be square is the opinion of the rabbis, whereas our Mishnah is the opinion of Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. What does the rabbis and Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov have to do with anything? So remember, our Mishnah had also said that according to Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, if you have this sewage conduit that leaves the chatzar, so if it's covered for the first 4 amas, so right, it goes into Rosh Hashanah, but if the first 4 amas are covered, well then you would be allowed to pour your sewage through this conduit, because by the time it actually gets to Rosh Hashanah, i.e., by the time it gets to the uncovered part, it will already have been absorbed in the ground. So we see that according to Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, he's concerned with absorption like Reb Zera is. Whereas the Chachamim say, no, even if the canal was like 100 amas in the chatzar, it doesn't matter because it's not about absorption, and therefore if it's not about absorption, it's going to be about keeping the dirt down like Rabbah. And therefore this brisa, which says that davka, we need the chatzar to be 4 amas by 4 amas, meaning that we care about that it's a square shape and it's about presentability, well, that would be like Rabbah, and that would be the opinion of the Chachamim, who say that it's not about absorption, it's about lizalef, to keep the dust down. But our Mishnah, which says it doesn't have to specifically be 4 amas by 4 amas, but it just needs a surface area of 16 square amas, well, that our Mishnah would be Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, and Reb Zera was saying like him, that it's about absorption. So, Umay Duchke de Reb Zera Luukme Lemasnisin Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. How come Reb Zera is saying that our Mishnah is like Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov? Wouldn't it be better for Reb Zera to say that the Mishnah is like the Chachamim? Why is he specifically saying that the Mishnah has to be like Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov? So Amarava says, Rava Masnisin Kshise, well, because the wording of the Mishnah was difficult for Reb Zera. He didn't understand something. My area the Tani Chatzer Shepchusa. Because Reb Zera is being very medactic, being very particular about the words that the Mishnah uses. If you look at the words of the Mishnah, it doesn't say, it's not talking about a chatzar that's 4 amas by 4 amas. It says a chatzar that has 4 amas. Right? Meaning, so Reb Zera is arguing that what the Mishnah means is a chatzar that has a surface area of 16 square tfachim, but it doesn't have to be square per se. And therefore, who's the one who says that it doesn't have to be square? That's Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. So Elav Shema Mina, Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Shema Mina. So we see that the ratio of the Mishnah must dafka be Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. V'hami the save Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov ratio Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. So then the Gemara asks, yeah, but the Sefer is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, right? Right after this part, we get to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's opinion about the conduit being covered for Amis and that being permitted, implying that up until then it wasn't Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So the Gemara answers, cooler Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. No, it's all Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That whole part of that whole first section of the Mishnah is all Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And it's just missing some words in the Mishnah. Add the following words, and then all is good. If you have a chatzar that is less than 4 amis, you're not allowed to pour water into it on Shabbos. But if it's 4 amis, even if it's, let's say 8 by 2, shofchin, you can pour water. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, biv akamor, that if you have a sewage conduit that is covered, dalet amis, b'rshus harabim, for 4 amis, b'rshus harabim, shofchin l'socha mayim b'Shabbos, you can pour water into it on Shabbos, because by the time it gets to the other side, by the time it gets to rshus harabim, it will have already been absorbed. So therefore, the main thing is that the water needs to be able to be absorbed, and as long as it has a surface area of 16 amos, it can be absorbed. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Biva Kamer Chule. Okay, so we're going weiter in the Mishnah. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov had said that if you have this conduit that leaves your chatzar to and it goes into rshus harabim and it's covered for 4 amos, well then you'd be allowed to pour water into it because it'll be absorbed by the time it gets out to rshus harabim. The Chachamim had argued on that and said, no, even if there's this conduit of 100 amos in the chatzar, it doesn't matter, even though certainly by the time it gets to rshus harabim it will have been absorbed. Right, so then the Chacham said, but what you would be allowed to do is you'd be allowed to pour the sewage water onto the roof, and then from the roof let it go into the conduit, and from the conduit leave, I guess it would go from the roof into this conduit that begins on the roof for it, to like get rid of the water on the roof, and then go down to the chatzar, and from the chatzar out. So maslisin de lo kachananya. Well, the rabbi's opinion in our Mishnah is not like Chananya. The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, Chananya Omer, afilu gag mea amma. Even if you have a roof that's 100 amas long, lo yishboch, you shouldn't pour water onto the roof, even if it's going to end up going into some conduit. Lefisha enagag asur livloa el kaleach, because a roof has like tar and things on it to make sure that it doesn't absorb the water, and so therefore, right, and it's not made for absorption. Roofs are made to flow water out of the roof. You don't want water to sit on the roof. They're dafka made to get water out of the roof and through a conduit and out to rshus harabim. And therefore, even if you pour water just directly onto the roof, the intention really is going to be to get it to leave onto rshus harabim, so that wouldn't be allowed according to Chananya. Tana, we learn in the Brisa, when do we say that if the chatzar is less than 4 amas by 4 amas, you have to build a cesspool? B'yimos hachama, that is in the summer. But in the winter you could pour all you'd like and don't worry about it. Meaning, so when we say that you need a cesspool, it's davka in the summer. But in the winter, if you have a chatzar that's less than 4 amas by 4 amas, you don't need the cesspool. You can pour the water, or at least we're going to see that's one opinion. So Amar Rava says, Rava, Adam, so my time, how come this is? How come in the winter you don't need a cesspool? So Amar Rava, Adam Rotza Shivlu Mayim Bimkoman. Because in the winter, a person isn't necessarily interested in this sewage leaving the chatzar, because the chatzar is already dirty, right? It's the winter, it rains, it's muddy, it's dirty. So therefore, in the winter, even without a cesspool, he's not, when he pours the sewage out into the chatzar, he's not like, I really intend for this sewage to, this like water to leave the chatzar into the rshus harabim. He says, look, my chatzar is a mess anyways, I don't really care if they just stay right there and get absorbed where they are. But in the summer, where there's no rain and the chatzar is tidy, well then, if it's less than 4 amas by 4 amas, well then he's not going to want the sewage water to remain in his chatzar, and he's going to intend for it to go out to rshus harabim. So when he pours it and it goes out to rshus harabim, it's going to be a problem. Amalei Abaye says to Rava, but 1 second, Rava, the Chacham say in our Mishnah that if you have this sewage water and you pour it, even if it's 100 amas, right? You're still not right. Even if the sewage conduit is 100 amas long, and it's certainly going to get absorbed, right? And you're interested in it being absorbed. Still, we're saying that it's not allowed. So here also, right, in the winter, where you'd be very interested in it getting just absorbed where it is in the chutzner, still it doesn't make a difference. It shouldn't be allowed. So Amarle, so Rava responds, Hasam l'may nechush. She says, look, when it comes to the winter, what is your concern? Mishum kilkul chatzero amikalkul v'kaima. If you're concerned that the chatzar is going to get, ruined, it's already ruined from all the rain and everything. V'i mishum gizera shamayomu zinoro shoploni mikaleach mayim. And if you're concerned that, well, maybe people are going to say that, so and so he's like pouring water into his conduit on Shabbos and it's going out to Rosh Hashanah. Stam tzinoros mikalchin heim. All conduits in the winter when it's rainy have water that are going out to Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, in this case, in the winter, there really isn't anything to worry about. In the summer, you can argue that, even if it's 100 amas long, we still don't want you to pour it because we have certain chashashes, right? Maybe, maybe people will see, maybe the water will end up getting out, whatever it is. But in the winter, there's really nothing to be concerned about. Rav Nachman has a different take. His take is not that during the winter you don't need to make any cesspool at all. Rather, Amar Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman b'mosa geshamim uka machzik sasayim nosnin lo sasayim. That in the winter. So if you have a chutzner that's less than 4 amos by 4 amos, and you have a cesspool that is able to hold 2 sa'ah of your water that you will use on a regular day. So nosim lo sa'asayim. So you have this cesspool that is capable of holding 2 sa'ah, and you can pour your 2 sa'ah into that cesspool. Machzik sa'ah nosim lo sa'ah. And if in the winter you have a cesspool that can hold 1 sa'ah of water, no problem. So just pour 1 sa'ah of water, and if it goes over, it's not a big deal. It wasn't your intention. However, during the summer, machzik sasayim nosin lo sasayim. So if the cesspool is able to hold 2 sa'ah of sewage water, so b'seder, pour all your water there. But sa'ah, if the cesspool is capable of holding only 1 sa'ah of water, ein nosin lo kol ikar, you can't use it at all. I.e., the distinction between, according to Rav Nachman, the distinction between summer and winter is that in the winter we're a little bit more lenient, right? Which is that if in the winter you have your cesspool that can hold 2 sa'ah, so great. And if it could only hold 1 sa'ah, alright, we're not going to go crazy, fine, b'seder, it's okay. But you still need to have some cesspool. Whereas in the summer, you specifically need to have a cesspool that can hold 2 sa'ah of water. If you have a cesspool that can only hold 1 sa'ah of water, you cannot use it at all. How come? But in the summer, why don't we just say like the same thing in the winter? That if you have a cesspool that can hold 1 sa'ah, so just use it for 1 sa'ah. So the Gemara answers, Gezerah Dilma Osilitein Le Sa'asayim. Well, we're concerned that in the winter, if you have a cesspool that only holds 1 sa'ah, you might end up putting 2 sa'ah, pouring both of your sa'ah of water in there. But if that's the case, but if that's the case, then also be concerned in the winter that if you have a cesspool that can only hold 1 sa'ah, you might end up pouring 2 sa'ah in there. And we said that in the winter it's acceptable. So the Gemara answers, Hasam, my nechushla, the same way that we answered for Rava. What's the concern in the winter? Imishum kilko chatzera mikalkala v'kaima. If we're concerned about that his chatzar is going to get ruined, it's already ruined from the rain. Imishum gzera shema yomru tzinoro shaploni mikaleach mayim. And if we're concerned that somebody is going to say, oh, so-and-so's chatzar, or so-and-so's sewage conduit is running on Shabbos, maybe you're like allowed to pour sewage to Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. Stam tzinoros mikalchin, all conduits are running with water on Shabbos during the winter, and therefore during the winter there's no concern if there's a cesspool that can only hold 1 sa'ah, so you should only pour 1 sa'ah in there. But if it goes over, it's not a big deal, and we're not concerned that you're interested in the water going out to Rosh Hashanah, so you don't dirty your chatzar. Your chatzar is dirty anyways, and people aren't going to assume anything. Amar Abaye ilkach afilu korva afilu koraim. Says Abaye, well, if that's the case, then pour as much water as you want in the winter. Even a kor or even a koraim, right? Because after all, there's no concern because you don't care if your chatzar gets dirty and nobody's going to say anything wrong. And therefore, at least according to the art school explained it. So according to Abai, he's basically saying, look, according to Rav Nachman, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. It's not like so well defined. According to Rav, he says, look, during the winter, you just don't need a cesspool at all because there's just no concern. Rav Nachman saying, like, you need a cesspool of one that can hold one saw, but if it's more than that, like, we're not really, if you end up pouring more water, then it's not really concerned. Well, then, like, why do you really need any cesspool at all? Because then you may as well just pour a whole core or korayim of water. So therefore, at least the art school wanted to argue that it makes sense to say that like Rava, that it, simply in the winter you wouldn't need a cesspool at all. If you have these two apartments, one opposite the other, so Amar Rava says, Rava, afilu ervu, even if they made an eruv, right? So meaning the Mishnah, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah had said that if you have these two apartments, one opposite the other, right? So miksasan asu uka, and then one of the apartments made this cesspool, miksasan lo asu uka, and the other apartment didn't. So asu uka mutar and lo asu uka asurin. So the apartment that made the cesspool is allowed to use the cesspool, but the apartment that didn't make the cesspool is unable to use the cesspool below. And Amar Rav afilu eruv, and that's even if they made an eruv, still the apartment that didn't make the cesspool would be unable to use it. Amar Abai, in my time, Abai says, how come they wouldn't be able to use it? If you're concerned that, well, maybe there's too much water, right? Meaning they made a cesspool that can hold 2 saw, and between the two apartments they're going to have 4 saw of water, so it's just too much water. Therefore, the apartment that didn't contribute cannot use it. But we learn in a brayso that whether we're talking about a cesspool, whether we're talking about a broken kli that you want to use for holding sewage water, brecha or a pool, va'areva or a small boat, afal pishin is malu mayim erev Shabbos, even though they got filled up with water from erev Shabbos, and therefore any new water that you're going to pour in there is going to overflow to Rosh Hashanah. Shofchen l'socha mayim b'Shabbos, you're still allowed to use it on Shabbos, so that's not a concern. And therefore, the fact that we're concerned that you have 2 apartments using one cesspool is not an issue. Rather, if you're going to state what Rava said, you have to say it in the following way: Amar Rava lo shanu ela shelo ervu. When they say that the second apartment is unable to pour stuff into the cesspool, it's when they did not make an eruv. Aval eruv mutarim, but if they made an eruv, then both apartments would be able to pour stuff into the cesspool, and we're not concerned about it overflowing. V'chilo eruv my time alo, and when they didn't make an eruv, then how come the apartment that didn't make the cesspool is unable to pour their water there? So Amar Rav Ashi gzera dilma asi lafuke mimani devatim lahasam, because we're concerned that, well, if there's no eruv and they're pouring their water into this cesspool, well, then they might actually go down and take things mamish into the chutzner, and they didn't make an eruv, so therefore it wouldn't be allowed. Hadran alach ketzed mishtatfin chevra. We'll come back to you. Ketzed mishtatfin. We are now getting up to the 9th out of 10th parak of Masechta Ayruvin. Chevra, let us review daf Peiches of Masechta Ayruvin. The beginning, we talked about, way back at the beginning, we talked about pouring water through a balcony, right? That there was a question: can you also pour water or only draw water? Then we talked about usurping property, right? If you chop an abandoned property, so do you have to make an eruv in order to be able to use it on Shabbos or not? Then we got into this sugya of cesspools. So the question, so we said that if you have a chutzner that's 4 amas by 4 amas, then you do not need to make a cesspool. If it's less than 4 amas by 4 amas, you do need to make a cesspool. And the question is, how come? Rabbi says, well, because it's about keeping down the dust. If it's 4 amas by 4 amas, you're interested in keeping down the dust, and you're not interested in pouring it out to Rosh Hashanah. But if it's less than that, then you're not concerned about keeping down the dust, and you're more interested in pouring it to Rosh Hashanah. And Reb Zera says it's about absorption, right? If it's 4 amas by 4 amas, it's capable of absorbing the 2 sa'ah that people produce every single day. Less than that, it's incapable of absorbing all that water, and it will memela end up going out to Rosh Hashanah. Then we talk about cesspools in the winter. We had 2 opinions. We had the opinion of Rava, who says in the winter you don't need a cesspool at all. Then we had the opinion of Rav Nachman, who says that in the winter you need you need a cesspool, but even if it's only 1 sa'ah, that would be acceptable. Chevra, I hope you enjoyed that. Peches, peace out.